Pretty sure I'll be live in a second. Yeah, what's up? I'm Alex the Entrepreneur, and this video. In this video, I'm just gonna show you the freelance web developer roadmap. So I'm gonna have my chat on the right, and if you happen to ask a question, I'll answer it once I'm done. At this point, I'm just gonna do a brain dump, and I'll slowly finesse this topic. Something that you must know of me is that I'm in this to become a public speaker, so I actually like improvising my content. So if that's something that you don't enjoy, you can either skip ahead or wait for a more structured version of this video. However, I think there's a lot of value in just brain dumping, also because you're gonna get my emotions rather than just get a bunch of stale content. So that's why I do what I do. And at this point, I have my Coggle. I actually already prepared a bunch of notes, and I'm gonna probably be increasing on this side. Although, as you'll see in the upcoming videos that have to do with freelance work, 50% of your work will have to do with keeping the skills sharp, keeping your soul sharp and learning new tech. So for example, I'm constantly researching how to handle JWTs. Today I was looking at the newest release of Next.js. I was looking at how to use Magic Link or Auth0 as authentication providers and potentially thinking how to integrate them with Strapi. So that's what I've been researching. But at the same time, I'm also completely aware that I'm not going to make more money by researching those topics. I'm going to make more money by being able to sell my skills and being able to convince people to pay me more, honestly. So that's why every time I start talking about freelancing, I kind of start talking about the developer roadmap and the skills that you should work. But I find myself inevitably going into a spiral of just talking about sales and sales strategies and how to increase your value and all that stuff. So what I'll do is I'll actually start with that. I want to briefly mention that you see that there's basically three main paths on the freelancer. Although these are the quote unquote optional paths. These are the stuff that you're going to learn just because if you're a flexible freelancer enough, you're going to have to learn this. So something that I do, for example, is I actually am quote unquote an expert in Webflow because there's a substantial number of people, I would say 5 to 10% of my clients that use Webflow. And as such, I would be doing them a disservice in not learning it, although I wouldn't personally need to learn it as a, if you look at my skills, there's no point in me learning Webflow. However, my clients use it just like they use Zapier, for example. And so it makes sense for me to learn them. And so these have to do with design, marketing, and UX. So I'll briefly touch on these. The reason why you want to learn a little bit of design is so that you can work better with designers. If every designer that I worked with ever actually took a development course, they would be a better designer in communicating with me. And if every developer that I met took a designing course, they would probably be a better developer that can work better with designers. That's because the way we see the world is completely different. And so if we can put ourselves in the shoes of the other role, we would understand better what they do and how they do it. And so for every single time I made a designer disappointed in me because the design didn't look as good as what they did, there's the other times where I was frustrated with a designer just designing something that is just not realistic and not feasible, especially considering budget and time. The marketing stuff, you'll basically, as a developer, especially if you do web development, you're going to end up having to deal with Google Analytics, Hotjar, Intercom, and various other tracking services. And as such, you will learn a little bit of marketing out of that, or at least about marketing automation. You will be hard pressed to find a web developer that never used MailChimp, for example. That's a great example. And at the same time, some developers, especially if you're into WordPress or if you do server-side rendering, you end up having to learn about SEO, or at least the technical side of SEO, and maybe even a little bit of schema markup, because SEO, there's basically SEO requirements for that. And then you also have to like point your domain name server so that your clients will be able to use Google Search Console. So it's something that comes up a lot. And lastly, there's user experience, which is kind of let's call it the latest branch of study. At this point, I'm opening the chat. So thank you for bearing with me and sharing this experience. But like basically UX from a ordinary day-to-day life of a freelance web developer, UX is just a buzzword that people use to ask for more money. That's basically what it is. However, it's actually a very well-defined area of studies, and there's actually a few how do you call it, electives in university that you can take, such as human-computer interface, or you can look at the Nielsen. What is it? Nielsen Norman group. You can look at Nielsen Norman groups. They have the 10 heuristics. So there's actually a well-defined area of study it may be the most useful secondary skill that you can learn in order to do your job better as a web developer, will be to learn a little bit of usability and user experience. However, it comes up only if you end up having to finance a product. And so it comes up maybe 20% of the time rather than the 80%. The 80% of your work as a freelancer online will have to do either with entrepreneurs, or it will have to do with companies that are looking to outsource. So when you find companies that are looking to outsource, they'll typically look for a very structured engagement where there are clear defined requirements and you just have to satisfy them. So most likely you basically will have to write a contract, you will have to negotiate deadlines and milestones. And these typically tend to, like the majority of these deals just tend to fall off. And I'm assuming that bigger companies, like instead of solo developers, bigger companies or even small, let's call it boutique shops, are able to land this type of gigs because they provide a better structure. On the other end, what I found, the pattern I found, at least in my experience, for people that you're going to end up working with is entrepreneurs. You're gonna work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and these are people that either are looking to, so even myself, people that are looking to expand their business. So that would be myself included. People that already have a business model that works. They're simply trying to scale it up or trying to expand. And you'll see this, that expanding from one person to two people or three is typically a bigger jump than even expanding from 10 to 20, because it's very hard to get the ball rolling when you get started, especially for fear of wasting your resources, basically. But you'll meet a lot of these entrepreneurs, and so what these people truly value is typically the adaptability of getting the job done, rather than some sort of magical silver bullet that will solve all of their problems. And that's why I tend to prefer starting to talk about the roadmap with the sales part, because yes, you have to go through a bunch of skills, and I'll cover them. I swear I will get to them. However, the reality of it is that you can the first thing that as a rational individual you should be doing would be to go on Stack Overflow and look at the developer report, so that you can make an informed decision as to which technologies you actually want to use. However, this report has to do with self-reported community that uses Stack Overflow. These are not the people you're looking to sell your services to. These are the people that are already selling the services, or they'll have enough time to even go through this thing, because I don't think they give you money for it. So you probably will do it because you have the free time or you want to contribute. So you have to take this with a grain of salt, that this is the provider side of the market. It's not the buyer side. If you want to look at the buyer side, you have to go on freelancing platforms. And I'll slowly figure out a way for me to stream myself going on Upwork and doing a few applications, and maybe even going on CodeMentor and doing the same. At this point, I'm not comfortable with doing that, but I'll eventually get to that point. And maybe I know in an upcoming video, I'm going to show a bunch of images from going to Upwork, but they're going to be edited for privacy concerns so that we don't leak other people's information. But that said, the point that I'm trying to make is that you can spend a lot of time looking at this graph, thinking that one, you're not enough, or two, you have to learn something new, or three, you don't even know what you are supposed to learn. Because let's look at these top technologies. You have JavaScript. You're like, duh, of course you are supposed to learn JavaScript. The web is basically JavaScript. So if you don't learn JavaScript, you're dead. But then you see HTML and CSS and you're like, what does that even mean? At this point, what is HTML and CSS? Like, as a job, not as a skill. Clearly, you need to know how to show divs and spans and tables and paragraph, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, learning HTML and CSS will not net you any job. The only job you can get for HTML and CSS will be a $5 to $10 an hour job. It's an extremely low skill job that you're going to be outcompeted by, let's call them raising economies where the cost of living is lower. You're just going to be completely outcompeted because there's very little incentive for even for big companies or ambitious companies to have an HTML expert. However, if you start to look at different languages, so let's say Python, which clearly has been on the up and up. However, it's been on the up and up for multiple reasons, which we can dig into. But again, looking at this graph will tell you nothing about it. Same goes for SQL. What does SQL even mean? At this point, I know like SQL means nothing in terms of the technology, because technically speaking, you would be using either PostgreSQL, MariaDB, or you would use MySQL. So are we talking about using PHP MyAdmin when working with WordPress, or are we talking about using PG or using MariaDB when working with Node.js or other stuff? So this doesn't tell you much of it. And as such, you definitely want to, you don't want to take this approach of being told what to learn. And that's why I'm gonna start by talking about the sales, and then I'll get to the other side. And in the upcoming videos on my channel, I'll talk about building your portfolio. So I'm gonna cover how you get to even start, because if you don't have a portfolio, like technically speaking, this is the number one thing, will be build a portfolio. And there's a point where there's huge diminishing returns unless you're on AngelList. Yesterday I was looking at AngelList, and what I saw on AngelList is that basically there's all these people that are like maximizing their portfolio. Seems to work really well. If you're looking for 6 figures income, then you want to maximize your portfolio 100%. However, if you're looking to get started freelancing and you don't even know if this is a fit for you, you don't want to spend too much time maximizing it. You just want to have free items. The free items that you want to have are going to be a CRUD application. So you want to have free items. You want to have, what's going on? You want to have a CRUD application so that you can prove that you can do a full stack job. Then you want to have an e-commerce. And lastly, you want to have an API related job. So if you have those three elements in your portfolio and they look good enough, you're bound to be accepted in freelancing platforms, and you're bound to land jobs as long as you do what I'm about to tell you. So let's start by covering your sales process. So the sales process is divided in 2 parts. The first part is acquisition, and the second part is retention. Acquisition means that you can get more fish, you can get more clients, and retention means that whatever fish you get, you can keep. And the better you get at keeping fish, the more likely you have to have a stable career. But the better you get at acquisition, the likely you are to make more money in your career. And that's because if you have a job, let's say you have a stable job and you have no money on the side, how likely are you to actually ask for more money? There's something about negotiation that gets always said, is that you can win a negotiation only when you're willing to walk away from it. Those are the only negotiations you can win. So if you don't have what is called fuck you money, which is 6 months of your rent or 6 months of your living expenses set aside, you can't even talk about this side. So you shouldn't be focused on retention when you get started. You should only be focused on acquisition. So this is the part where I'm trying to bring a little bit of emotional leverage on your side, because this is literally what you're going to have to do. Okay. You have your portfolio, you go on Upwork, you go on freelancer.com, you come on Code Mentor, you go on People Per Hour, you go on AngelList, you go on Facebook, you do whatever you want, but this is where you're at. You have your portfolio. Now it's time to prospect. And prospecting is the act of finding new clients. Prospecting comes from the gold mining terminology, where people will prospect the earth to find gold pieces. But the idea is that you're basically trying to find somebody that you would be happy to have a business relation with. And the biggest concept that comes at all times when you're dealing with prospecting is the idea of positioning or framing, which is the idea that if you set your relation, your initial relation properly, you're going to have an easy time dealing with your clients. Well, if you do not do that, then you're basically wasting your time. And that's because I could literally, a great example that I can give you is I could go right now as a, let's call it 6-figure freelancer or whatever, like as a highly paid consultant. I could go on the street now and offer my advice for free. And the majority of people wouldn't even take it. Like it would be basically it would be their loss, but they wouldn't even notice it because they don't value my advice. So if you just like they say in the Bible, if you spend your efforts, you're basically going to be throwing your pearls to those swines. So instead of doing that, you want to find people that are actually interested in engaging with you, and that's the first step. So once you find those type of people, and that's why I highly recommend you get started on a freelancing platform, because those people are going to be already pre-qualified by the platform because they have a need. So they will post a request. Then you can get started engaging with them by offering value first. And offering value first means that instead of telling them that you're good, instead of telling them that you have a bachelor, instead of telling them that you can get the job done and that you read the requirements, you're literally going to tell them how they could get the job done by themselves. It's as simple as that. Instead of spending 10 seconds copying and pasting your candidature, you're just going to say, this is how I will do the job. I will do for step 1, step 2, step 3. My favorite example that has nothing to do with development is painting a house. If you want to sell how to paint a house, you're not going to tell them that you are the best painter in the world, because nobody cares and most people don't even, like, they won't relate to that. What you're going to tell them is either you're going to ask with a leading question, which is like, how big is the house? How many walls? What is the metrature? How many square feet, et cetera, et cetera. Or you're just going to tell them how you will go through the process of painting their house. So you can tell them, I'm going to get some plastic bags. I'm going to cut them out. I'm going to take my tape and I'm going to use the tape to do what I call masking. And I'm going to mask the walls and the floor so that when I paint, I can paint faster and I'm not going to make a mess. Okay. So that way they know, they know the secret. They can run away with the secret, because the reality of it is that the secret or the steps to actually paint a house are common knowledge, especially if you spend 10 minutes in the industry, you know them. The problem is that most people either don't know how to execute on them, or they actually value your expertise enough to pay you for that. And that's why for you to give away your secrets, for you to give away your most important secrets first, is the best way to capture attention. The better you get at giving out your secrets, the better you're going to get at getting people to relate to you. So just be very straightforward in offering value. And then after you offered value, it's time for reciprocity. If you keep offering value without asking for reciprocity, you're basically getting exploited. You're just wasting your time. So there has to be a point, and typically is after 3 or 4 lines of text. It doesn't have to be this massive poem that you're going to have to write, but after a few lines of text, you actually want to give them a call to action. So again, in the case of painting a house, you want to ask them, how big is the house? What is the deadline? Do you have the color or do you need me to buy it? And you typically just want to ask one question to get the ball rolling, just to get the conversation going. You don't want to concern yourself with asking the perfect question. You just want to start an engaging conversation. Once you do that, you just want to get them on the phone. And once you get them on the phone, from my experience, when people are already, you framed yourself properly, you already close them. The phone is just a process that people have to go through, because you go from being a number, from just being a digit on the screen, to actually being a human being. Just like for you to watch me now is not the same thing as you taking a session with me. For you to go from here, looking at this video and engaging passively, to actually going on Code Mentor, putting in your credit card and talking to me, going on a chat, and then actually paying me and also actually being on a live call with me is a different process, and it requires and it would only make sense if you value what I do. Otherwise you wouldn't even start with it. And that's why it's so important to basically cut early. And again, that's why I highly recommend going on a freelancing platform. And again, the last thing would be closing. How do you close? You just ask what you want and you see whether it works or not. My advice on that, many people have like anxiety in asking for more money, or they have anxiety in just going for it. These things never truly go away as long as you keep pushing yourself. Because once you start asking for the same price to a lot of people, you're gonna get comfortable with it. But ultimately, the part that has to do with closing the deal, or going through terms of a contract, the most important part is that you're gonna ask for something that you would actually be happy with. You actually have to be happy with the consequences of your work. So most people starting out would take a $5 job just to get a job. And even myself, I actually did that. But looking back, I realized that it's not as important as actually continually doing a job that will reward you. And as such, in order for it to be rewarding, you also need to be rewarded. You also need to have incentives and a pay that will actually satisfy you. As such, don't look at somebody not paying you a proper rate as a rejection. Just look at it as it not working out. Basically, it was not a win-win deal. And anytime you do business in the internet, you have to look for win-win, because there's like a very real concept of karma, which is just going to bite you in the back. If you try and scam a lot of people will have the free time to take vengeance on you. So it's definitely not a good idea for you to ruin their day or to try and scam people. Don't look at it that way. Look at it as always trying to find a win-win. Some people value your work, those people will pay more. Some people do not value your work, and those people will pay a little less. You want to find those people that value you, and you want to find people that you value. And it just comes down to actually going for it. So at the end of the day, if there's one thing that I'm telling you, is get to a portfolio as soon as you can, and then get to the market, because everything I'll tell you here will be updated in 6 months and will be completely useless for you to spend a year or 2 years of your life going here, when the only skill that you truly need to get is the ability of connecting with people, and then the ability of solving problems rapidly. So this again is my take on it. I value every other option that you may have, such as taking university. I actually did take university. You could also go it alone, or you could use mentors, or you can do boot camps, or you can do micro degrees. Those are all legitimate paths. But what I'm truly saying is that if you're interested in freelancing, you shouldn't be waiting to be done for that, because you may hate freelancing. So you may as well just go on a freelancing platform and learn to find leads, because that's 50% of your job. That said, there's also there's the second you get good at this, and my recommendation for this part here is that you want to engage with at least your first 100 people you're going to talk to. You're just going to make a mess. Like, you're going to fail. You're not going to be able to get a decent job, even like a 1-day gig that pays you $50. You're not going to be able to land it because you're going to do something stupid. The point is that you go through these first 100 failures as fast as you can, so that you can learn from them. And most of the time, the few mistakes you're going to make are making typos, copying and pasting, not addressing the client, or just not offering enough value. And the other 50% of the time, they're not even going to read your application. That's something that happens a lot. And we can spend hours talking about why that happens. But the reality of it is that there's a numbers game in this. And a part of it is that literally some people will never have the time to even look at your candidature. So you can't maximize for that. And in order to avoid being held back because people don't read your application, you just have to apply to a lot of jobs. That's just part of the gig. If you're not willing to do that, you probably are not cut for freelancing. The way I like to look at it is that freelancers, we basically trade uncertainty for freedom. That's basically what it is. It's just like rent. With rent, you pay the same amount of money as buying, but in a few months you can leave. With buying, you have to buy for 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years. So you have a longer time frame of commitment. And that's the same thing with freelancing. So typically a freelancer would argue that they have a higher hourly rate than somebody that is employed. And that's true, but it typically is not as rosy as you will think if you factor in the opportunity cost. So there's a lot of good stuff in being an employee. I just never found that path for myself. And that's why I don't necessarily recommend doing that. But the way I like to say it is that as an employee, you are optimizing for one job and you're landing with that one job. So you are negotiating, you're basically doing this and you're doing this and this, you still have to get rejected 100 times and just look like a fool and whatever, and just go for it and try to find a win-win deal. But the difference is you're going to do that once, or you're going to do that once every year or every 2 years or every 10 years or every 50 years, whatever. However, as a freelancer, you're just taking more risk because you're willing to do that every month or every day or every week or every whatever. You're basically accepting more uncertainty in exchange for freedom. That said, once you nail the prospecting side, you're basically golden. And the last thing I want to say on, and it's probably the most important thing that the biggest objection I ever get from people that I recommend freelancing is that they don't want to fail at the job. So they have this issue of uh, closing the deal and promising that they're going to do something and then not being able to deliver on it. And that's a true consequence. It's a true thing. However, the way I like to look at it is that you can always refund at any time. You can take the money, you can give the money back. You don't have to do anything. You basically waste your own time. So this is the reality of doing freelancing, is that as long as you're willing to give the money back and be extremely ethical, then you're not going to have any issue. You may as well just give it a shot. So that's cool. And the other part of sales, which I'm going to cover very briefly, is retention. Retention has to do with keeping the clients that you have, or at least keeping them happy. And it typically actually starts with the doing a few different tweaks on your prospecting. The biggest one being requirements elicitation. And that's why I put requirement elicitation both in interviewing and in retention. The reason for this is that when you're interviewing, which from my experience, interviewing online on freelancing websites means that they already want to hire you. It's just like a formality most of the time, unless you go through like bigger companies. Bigger companies will do staged interviews, but again, I don't think you want to optimize for those. I don't even know how many of those companies actually end up hiring, to be honest, from my experience. While smaller teams, they just need somebody like a mercenary to get the job done. The second they interview, they're just going to hire you. They're just going to see if you're a good fit, if you're a normal human being, and if you are, they're going to hire you. That's how I see it. However, while for them they already made their mind, you still may have to make your own mind. That's where there's a nuance to actual freelancing. So this is where I call requirements elicitation. So you actually want to spend as much time as it's needed to understand clearly what your client wants. If you don't know what your client wants, you're not going to be able to help them. You're literally not going to be able to build what they want. And so you're going to go through what typically is called feature creep. And feature creep is when you thought you had to build a certain thing and you did, and then your client keeps asking you for more. They keep asking you for more, for more, for more. Now, there's a percentage of people in the global population that have a trait called sociopathy. They're literally sociopath. They do not have empathy for other people and they will exploit you. Those people are a certain percentage. I would estimate 1% from my experience. And those people will exploit you willingly. However, the majority of people don't want to exploit you willingly. They just exploit you because the situation is weird. They end up just asking you and you keep doing it. And so basically you end up exploiting yourself. Something you can, the way you avoid that is, on one end, you could just set up an hourly rate where that way you can't be exploited because they're just paying you by the hour. But alternatively, you could just do a better job at requirement elicitation, which is figuring out and putting it on paper or on an electrical document, putting out the actual job that you have to do. And at the same time, once you figure out what they want, you can do what I call win-win negotiation, which is the act of going for a deal that is win-win for the both of you. So in my case, it will be win-win to do something that I find enjoying and that is highly paid. In your case, it's probably the same. So you just want to determine which number you want to get, how much you want to get paid, and what the deadlines are going to be. And then you want to also, based on your familiarity with your client, you also want to gauge payment in the sense that, so for example, let's say some of you watching right now will send me a job proposal. Since you're a random individual on the internet that just sends me an email, I'm probably going to ask for 100% of the money as a retainer. And that's because I don't know you. We never met. We never even talked. You're literally coming out of the blue. There is no trust there. So I may as well just, you either give me the money or I'm not going to even get started, because I just want to gauge how engaged you are on actually entering a win-win agreement. However, based on your familiarity with your clients, you can have different arrangements. Most of the times, I typically recommend 50-50. So 50% before starting and 50% before giving the final job. So let's say you're developing a website, you could be developing, for example, through GitHub and display incremental builds on a Roku or Vercel. There's nothing wrong with showing nightly builds to your client. They actually are an amazing way for you to build trust with them. However, you don't want to send them the code before they send you the second part of the money. You want them to send you the money, and then you're gonna send them the code. And by doing that, you will actually you will ensure that you don't get exploited. Now, most freelancing platforms protect you from being too exposed. However, working on the internet means that you are bound to be scammed eventually. You will be scammed 100% of the time. Like, no, my bad, I'll rephrase. You will eventually be scammed at least once in your lifetime as a freelance web developer. However, if you start using these practices of getting paid early, ensuring that the client is willing to pay, ensuring that there is a proper business relation, then you're not going to be scammed as much, and you're not going to have all those risks. And from my experience, the upside typically beats the downside of just being fired. Next up is communication and maintaining value and expectation management. So the idea with that is that you basically, like, this is kind of a weird topic, but like freelancing means that you basically will, like, your clients are going to become dependent on you. They basically will need you. They will need you to uh, to be able to be effective at their work. Because if you are an active person that works a lot and that puts the business as a high priority, and you offer value continuously, the people that are hiring you will literally start to develop a need of you. They will have a dependency on you. So the way you can continue, like, it's very important that you keep being valued properly. And the way you can do that is by managing expectations. So this is something that it's kind of hard to explain, but if you keep working at 100% of capacity at all times, and you basically are always there and you always answer every question or every message every minute at any time, and you always pull through, and you're like the perfect ideal candidate, you will actually end up being taken for granted. Because while most people never do that, the majority of people are like, the competition in terms of work ethic is non-existent. Like, the majority of people have zero work ethic. So it's actually very easy to have more success than others. If you are too eager and too friendly and too good, and you are always perfect, the majority of people that just, they will naturally start to devalue those qualities. Instead of looking them as 10 out of 10, they will start to slowly look at them as 8 out of 10 or even 6 out of 10, because they fail to have a reference for how other people will behave. And so you want to manage those expectations by either continually fighting to as the dependency increase between your employer and you want to basically either ask for more money continuously, like shamelessly continuously ask for more money, always make it clear that somebody else will take longer. So you can show them a job and you can tell them, well, normally it will take 4 days. However, since you're working with me, I can actually get it done in 1 day. And that's why you have to, for example, pay me X. You have to pay me more because I'm worth it, basically. And that's something that is just part of the course. And it's just part of how actual business relationship end up working. And the last part of the retention is actually delivering value. So paradoxically, actually being able to do your job is not the most important part of your job. And I know that sounds weird, but the reality of it is that you have to be able to sell your job and the importance of your job in order for your job to be valued. And then actually delivering your job is an afterthought. So if you can't deliver value, you're never going to have any of this. So obviously you're going to just be obliterated by the market because you're unable to do the job. So this part is you have to deliver, but at the same time, it's not enough for you to deliver value. You actually have to manage those expectations so that people understand that the value that you're bringing is way better than what they originally expected. So basically they value more. So at this point, we can finally get to the other side of the equation. Again, how do you actually end up deciding how to branch this out? In my opinion, you're going to basically go on the marketplace and you're going to see what's required. And if you go on the marketplace now, you should see a healthy 20 to 30% of WordPress jobs, 10 to 15% of React jobs, 20 to 30% of Python jobs, etc., etc. So you should see a healthy variety of jobs. And once you start exposing yourself to all those opportunities, you're going to have to make a few decisions and decide what you're going to actually end up working with. So let's say you want to get started and you have no experience in freelance development or freelance web development at all. So what's the first thing you're going to have to do? In my experience, the first course that you should take, and this is literally for anyone interested in computer science, is CS50. So you should just go on YouTube and type CS50 with David Malahan, if I'm not mistaken. And you should take CS50 immediately. It's the best course on the planet. It's literally the best course, completely free. It's gonna teach you the foundations of programming, of data structures, of memory management, quote unquote, and a little bit of engaging with operating systems. So it's basically gonna prime you to do what we actually do as professional software developers, which is solve arbitrary problems. So you're going to be exposed to using the terminal. And for me, the terminal is a tool that allows me to do a bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a completely arbitrary construct that has been built by other people and that I had to teach myself to use. And in the same way, if you start taking CS50, you're going to be exposed to all of this arbitrary stuff. Once you're done with it, you're going to have an understanding of basic data structures, basic memory management, a little bit of algorithms. I actually think like I passed my algorithms in university thanks to CS50. So it's actually pretty good content, and it's very useful. So in my opinion, you're basically skipping an entire semester of school if you take this, and you're going to be advantaged anyway. And even if you end up never using those technology, it's still a worthwhile endeavor. So that's definitely the first thing you want to do. And then since we're niching down to the web, you want to basically experience two types of architectures. One type is going to be called the monolith, and that's where I put WordPress. And in my experience, WordPress is still a very relevant technology that you want to consider learning. I'm not telling you to learn it. I'm just saying that it exists. And you probably want to figure out why WordPress was so successful and why WordPress was such a revolution at the time and what it literally brought up, because it literally created a new category for the service industry. So you want to look at the monolith, which is a mix of a single centralized server with a database and a bunch of processes that renders a website. So you have both what we call the backend and the front end, and you're going to have them on the same domain and website. So next up, once you figure out the monolith, which for my experience, I've spent quite a long time working with WordPress. I worked on it for over 5 years. So, and I built websites that are literally in the 6-figure range in terms of cost. So I've seen businesses come and go building them on WordPress. And at the time, it was an incredible solution. You want to still, honestly, you want to learn about the monolith architecture because it's an architecture that is still relevant. But at the same time, as of today, or as of the latest few years, and the introduction of mostly single page frameworks, you actually want to look at a different architecture that I typically call the microservice oriented architecture, where you typically are going to be separating the backend from the front end, which means that if you're looking to get into web development, you will still have to deal with these free topics no matter what. You're just going to have to decide how much you want to specialize. So at this point, we have what we can call the backend developer, the front end developer. Then you would have the full stack developer, which we can put at the working on the monolith as well. So you can put it here. You would say this would be a full stack developer, although typically a full stack developer is not as good as a backend developer in developing the backend, at least from my experience. And then you would have the development operations, or DevOps, and or network engineers working on server and infrastructure. And again, working on the web forces you to have a basic understanding of all of this. If you don't have a basic understanding, you basically will have to pay somebody else that does. And that's, for example, on the server infrastructure, the simplest example would be using AWS or using DigitalOcean, or even Linode. I used to use Linode a lot. And basically you can literally work with a server, which is either a real server or a virtual private server, or you can work with shared hosting. In that case, you probably will work with, for example, Bluehost or GoDaddy. But basically, you want to familiarize yourself with this part of the work, such as being able to deploy your application, being able to connect it to a domain by using DNS, because you're just going to have to do it. Like, it's something that will come up. The command Z in this application is terrible, but whatever. Anyway, it's something that's going to come up. I actually love the application, but I lost my progress, whatever. So you will have to make a decision on this. And I can assure you that there are engineers that only know this stuff. They are certified AWS solution architects, or certified solution architects, or development engineers, or DevOps specialists, and they have very respectable salaries, and they only do this part. However, for the majority of people, you will probably have to get a basic understanding of this, and then you could probably use what are called PaaS, which is platforms as a service. So my favorite example being Heroku, which abstracts away all of this. And in the latest development, especially if you work with React, you're going to also have Vercel or Gatsby. And these are basically, or Netlify, honestly, also Netlify, because you end up using it anyway. So these are platforms as a service that are specialized with specific frameworks. In this case, mostly React related stuff. So JavaScript with React, but they provide such a level of abstraction that they render the job of a development engineer for the specific task of deploying those applications unnecessary. So if you're going to work with front-end frameworks, you probably will be able to deploy your own applications. However, if you end up working with more specific applications, let's say edge computing with microprocessors in cars, you will probably still like the DevOps role is still highly valued. It's an extremely valuable role. It's just that it's not going to be needed for every job. So it really depends. Basically, it's one of those jobs where you either understand it superficially, or you heavily specialize in it. That's what I truly want to say. And then we open up our can of worm with backend and frontend. And this is where every other development roadmap would probably start, because you either have a bunch of assumptions as to what you're going to do here, or you basically have to branch out a lot on this. And I guess I'll just start branching out for a while. I'll just start putting a bunch of technologies and options that you may have, and then you're going to have to build your own path. Because at the end of the day, my belief and the core lesson that I want to bring with this video is that this will never end. There's no end. There's not going to be a shortage of this. The reason why this is not that much is because I could have spent an infinite amount of time on this. However, if you don't do this, you're just gonna, like, you're not gonna be, you're basically gonna, you'll be forced to take bad deals basically. So you actually want to focus on having a decent sale process. You want to focus on being where the fish is. You want to focus on actually understanding what the market is doing, and then you want to figure out that. That doesn't mean that you can take the opposite approach. Technically speaking, you could just pick one technology, teach it to yourself, and due to how big the world is and how many people we have in the world, you will probably be able to get a job on that as well, provided that you're good enough, obviously. I have a question in the chat from Mr. Pogi. He says, do you recommend Upwork for freelancing? I definitely recommend Upwork for getting started. I don't know if you want to do Upwork for 20 years, but for a few years, I could highly recommend Upwork, just to do a little bit of to get a little bit of experience, to get started, to see whether you enjoy it or not. So I would highly recommend you get started on a freelancing platform rather than start spamming your friends on Facebook, although you may make more money spamming on Facebook, to be fair. But I would recommend you get started there because it provides very low, it's a low stake environment where people are already there to find you and you're basically there to find them. And so you can learn your sales process in a fairly natural environment, in a place where you're supposed to do that. So at this point, let's just get started with the front end. You're going to learn the front end. What does front end even mean? That means things that your user end up seeing. So the first thing you want to learn, I guess, which actually explains this front end and back end differentiation, is the client and server architecture. And client and server is the idea that there is a machine called the client that makes an HTTP request, or whichever request you're going to make in the future, to a server, which is another machine located somewhere else. And the client and the server can talk to each other. And the client makes a request. This request, in case of HTTP, is a stateless request in the sense that you do the request and then the request is closed. So we have to create sessions to basically be able to simulate the process of having a constant conversation between clients and servers. But at the end of the day, you make a request, you receive some data back. That's basically the client server architecture. And the client server architecture lends itself to having what we call fat clients. Fat client will be a client, especially if you enrich it with Ajax, which I'll get to in a second. But fat client will be a client that contains a lot of the application logic. So from a point of view of computing, the majority of the computing or the processing is actually happening in the client. It's actually happening in the browser, basically. Anytime I mention client, you can think of browser. Anytime I mention server, you can think of an API server or a backend or a WordPress admin panel. That's kind of the representation you want to have. And so thanks to the introduction of Ajax, which means asynchronous JavaScript and XML, which is a old way or extensible markup language. It's not even old. People still use it. But the XML and basically Ajax allows us to create more interactive experiences. Basically, even this application here called Coggle is basically, it's not built in React, but it's basically in a front-end rich application where all of this stuff, all of the rendering is done in the front end. The data management and the actions all happen in the front end. And then at, I'm assuming at every step, the application makes a network request. I'm assuming every time I add something new, or even more, because they're also, yeah, you can see the changes API gets queried with a post request, and now we have changed our the data that we represent. And the interesting thing is that in this case, this is based on events. So adding a new node literally calls an event of type node added, and it passes some data. And I think there's going to be the text around here, I would assume, although there may be a second one here with yeah, patch, and maybe this one is as the old data, and there's the new data. So basically, this is one way in which you can build an application like this. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that every time you make a change in the front end, you have to make a request to the back end. And that means that's kind of peeling away the layers of illusion of how applications actually work. Like you would expect that when you make a change, this change is happening on the server. But the reality is that the change that you see here and the change that happens on the server are two separate events. They're two separate things. This is, I used to call it an illusion. This is an illusion. There's an illusion of continuity. There's an illusion of things that are happening. So if I were to disable the network, I probably would still be able to perform my operation because there's probably a try catch, but effectively, those changes are only happening in the front end. So yeah, it looks like it will still work. But if I refresh my browser, I probably lost these changes. And if they have some sort of caching, it actually looks like they do, which is really impressive because they thought about it. It's pretty cool. They probably have a different way to track that data, and which allows to avoid losing that data, which is really cool. It's a pretty badass. It shows that it's a well thought out product. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that there's going to be stuff that happens in the front end and stuff that happens in the back end. So once you understand this, you can actually practice it. You should be practicing this. And if you were to start with the monolith with WordPress, you will start this by doing a little bit of either theme development or plugin development. In WordPress, you have hooks and you have filters, and those allow you to basically save and update different data. So with hooks, you can create new actions. You can trigger actions, which basically trigger changes to either data or changes to stuff that you can see. And with filters, you can simply change the text that you end up displaying or the elements you end up displaying. And so if you play around with that, everything that you're going to write on with your PHP code will either fall in the front end or the back end. And that's why the monolith is kind of a way to cut a little bit of corners, because you get faster to both. You get faster to both a back end and a front end. And it's also super easy to spin up because you just get a $5 a month server and you just put your PHP code and it works. So it's very, very cool to get started with. To play around, but at the same time, at this point, it's not a very popular solution. The most popular, I mean, technically speaking, it still is, because WordPress powers 35% of the world, or my bad, powers 35% of the websites of the world. It doesn't power the world, but so it's still a very popular solution. However, it's not a modern one. A more modern one will be requiring you to learn different languages. And I think the main two languages that you want to consider learning are going to be either JavaScript or Python. This is basically the big divide. Do you want to learn Python or do you want to learn JavaScript? So what's the trade-offs? There's going to be trade-offs immediately. The trade-offs are Python is highly used in academic environments, extremely used in that, extremely used in, so let's put a little bit, academia, super used. Additionally, you can use it for data science. Basically, everything I see was done in Python. But, you know, it's not true, but we can generalize a little bit. Next up, Python is really good for doing smaller applications. You see a lot of small application. It has an immense ecosystem of packages. And by the way, you can build huge applications. It's just that I'll get to it. I'll get to the preferences in a second. And clearly, me making this video shows a high opinionation toward JavaScript, although I respect Python. I had a lot of clients using Python. So if you end up choosing Python, basically, you're going to have to learn two languages. There's no alternative to that. You will always have to learn JavaScript. There's no way to avoid it. You must learn JavaScript. Okay, you must learn it if you're doing web. Any web, you're going to have to learn JavaScript. The difference will be that if you learn Python, you're going to use Python in the back end, and then you're going to use JavaScript in the front end. That's the only difference. So something that I also I'll put it here, but something that I don't like to spend too much time on is HTML and CSS. From my experience, the less time you spend on this, you spend only on this, it's kind of the better. Because yes, you can spend the next year or whatever doing all these CSS challenges and doing all of these nice, I'll call them nice to haves. I don't want to. I guess I'm being a little offensive toward people that do a lot of front end, but at the end of the day, if you're doing just the CSS and HTML without any framework or any extra part, you're not building an application to its fullest. You're just building a part of it. It's like it's as if you were optimizing the loading times of an application you haven't built. So you should start by building the application first, and then you can always improve and figure stuff out. So from my experience, there's a lot of people that feel like they have to learn HTML and CSS before they can get started. I would highly disagree. You just have to learn the minimum amounts, and then you just keep going. And the other problem you're going to have with HTML CSS is that you're going to spend a lot of your mental energy trying to optimize something that is just an opinion. So a big debate that I can open up now, just to be a little inflammatory, will be divs, spans, and paragraphs and other semantic tags. So most of the time, let's say you're building a menu. I'm just going to give you a quick example, I guess. Actually, we're just going to go on Airbnb. We're going to have an argument with Airbnb because I love taking inspiration from them. And Airbnb is a company that has done a lot of open source. So they've done a lot of good stuff. However, if you ever dig into their date picker, the API for this shows a lot of compromise. That's the key word I'm going to use. There's a lot of compromise in the decisions that have been made in order to allow this to be done. And that basically makes it so that it's not as clean as you would expect. Like you would expect this thing that looks like the cleanest thing in the world. It looks like the slickest UI ever. You would expect also the code to be the cleanest code ever. From my experience, it's not. I honestly wouldn't know how they could improve because most likely they try to use this for more than one purpose. However, it's just an impression that you get. And so again, you're peeling off the layers by actually doing stuff. So at the end of the day, the big debate is whether you're supposed to use semantic tags such as paragraph or just meaningless tags such as div whenever you put text. And I can assure you that we can spend the rest of our lives trying to figure that out, or we can just use a convention. And the convention will be that anytime you're doing something like this, so like text here that is marketing text, you're actually going to use semantic tags such as H1 here, although, yeah, I guess H1 is fine because it's the header for the entire website. And then you will put something like an H2 or an H3 for a subtext because this is their second headline. So that's what you would do. They use the div. That's completely legitimate. And again, it looks the same, so it doesn't matter. But we can spend hours having this debate. And at the end of the day, it's a meaningless debate, not because there's nothing to be learned from it, but because you basically the only way to truly understand this would be to actually code out a solution with one version and then code another solution with a different version and then see which one was the easiest or the most versatile once you coded it. And so to settle the debate, which, I guess I raised the debate, I'll settle it, is that anytime, again, you do marketing text, it's going to be in a meaningful tag. Anytime it's not on a marketing text, just put a span or a div. Who cares? Nobody cares. 99% of the stuff that I put, there's going to be divs because then you flex them up and they look in line. So who cares? The end user doesn't care. You may care. I know I spent hundreds of hours debating this stuff. And every new project I start, I have a little bit of a philosophical debate with myself. But ultimately, you want to realize that your goal is not to optimize how the code is, although it's a nice thing to do. It's a very noble goal. But your goal is to provide your users, your visitors, with a seamless experience, with the best experience you can. So if while pursuing that goal, you can also pursue engineering goals and build something that you're proud of, that's amazing. However, you don't want to lose the forest for the trees. You actually want to get the website out. And a website as of 2020 is not only HTML plus CSS. It's going to have more functionality. So you don't want to spend you want to spend as much time as you need on HTML and CSS, but the reality of it is that you want to get through them fast. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit of projects that you want to do in HTML and CSS, and I want you to just blast through them. Don't waste time doing all this origami stuff unless you want to do it. If it's your hobby, it's your passion, I respect that. But if you think you have to do it to get a job, you're wasting your time. Good enough is good enough. So you probably want to be able to build a table, 100%, build a table, build a menu, then build I don't like how I did the thing, let me see if I can move it. Okay, that was not that. Let's do this. Okay, so build a table, build a menu. Then you want to build a list of elements, list of items, and the typical list will be blog or products. That's what you truly want to be building. Then you want to build a couple of templates. You want to build a sidebar template. You want to build a navbar. You just want to build a little bit of those, not too many. You don't want to spend too much time on that. You want to build a navbar, and you want to build a classic two columns template. And perhaps, no, I mean, you're going to learn Flex and you're going to learn Grid, but again, just understand them. Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist with this. You just learn it. You spend a couple days on it. You should be good to go. So my experience learning HTML and CSS, unless there's more learning that you have to do, which may be because you didn't take CS50. So you definitely want to take CS50 first, but you should be able to learn the basics of making a website that looks acceptable in a couple of days. And then you're going to finesse those for the rest of your life. So like, I'm not a CSS master that will tell you the spec off of memory. I'm never going to be able to do that. But I can build anything, and I can just use a little bit of documentation to figure stuff out on the fly. And so I don't want you to waste your time in unless it's your hobby. I want you to realize that there's a point of diminishing returns. HTML and CSS, super fast diminishing return. Leave this question. Okay, I'll read your question later. Thank you, Mr. Poggi. And so once you're done with HTML and CSS, you just want to go rapidly on JavaScript. And JavaScript is going to be a big deal. Again, we have that Python question of whether you're going to take Python or not. But when we deal with JavaScript, you're going to have to learn a bunch of stuff. So let's start by figuring out what you're going to learn. So first of all, there's the basics, the CS50 stuff of JavaScript. You can take it literally anywhere at this point. There's going to be, when I started a bunch of years ago, I guess 2012, I don't remember exactly, but I remember taking Codecademy. I remember taking Free Code Camp. I remember reading a book called Eloquent JavaScript, which is probably the hardest book you can ever read when it's the first time you learn programming. That was super tough. I remember reading the first chapter and being like, yeah, I'm super smart. I know. And then you go on the second chapter and they ask you FizzBuzz, I think. And I remember doing FizzBuzz and feeling so smart. Yeah, the chessboard, the FizzBuzz, that stuff. And then you go on the chapter after this on functions. And I remember just not understanding anything, just being completely confused out of it. And whenever that happens, honestly, the true advice I can give you is, one, you could take a mentor. So you can go on Code Mentor, for example, and you're probably not going to end up working with me, because at this point, you probably don't want to overpay for being unstuck. But at the same time, you probably want to just get that quick advice, so that taking a 10-minute session with a mentor unstucks you, gets you over, and you keep going. So that's probably a great idea. And the second one is, you want to take a pause on the theory and you want to use this. So instead of telling you the exact theory, which again, Free Code Camp, Codecademy, Eloquent JavaScript, if you search on Google, you know exactly what you need to learn. But the meta level of stuff that you truly want to learn is what I call lists and objects. That's the meta level stuff. Once you start to, if you can get the advice that I'm about to give you on JavaScript, you're already good enough to start building websites. So the list and object advice is that you basically will have lists, and lists what are going to be just lists of objects, right? And then you're going to have, so a list of object would be, for example, a post. A post is just going to be an object. It's going to have a name. So it's going to be post.name, and then post.subtitle, and post dot whatever. And so you're just going to iterate through the list. And that's where 3 keywords should pop up in your head. One of them should be map. The other one should be for each. The other one should be reduce. These are the 3 keywords that should come out immediately. I know at this point there's a new operator, the for in, but trust me, just learn map, for each, and reduce, because this is called functional programming. If you end up learning Lisp, if you end up learning, I think even Prolog, these concepts are important to all of programming versus an operator that is a situational operator, just like the syntax for Python is a situational syntax, while the principles behind it are way more useful than the actual syntax. You can always read the syntax in 10 seconds and pick it up from an example, while if you understand map, for each, and reduce, then you basically you have superpowers now, because one line of code, and I'll just do an example here, I guess, on the console. One line of code turns you into a superhero, because now you have to figure it out once, and then you just use that operator and it figures it out for you. So let's say you have a list of objects, and maybe a list of objects is already too complicated, but if it's too complicated, I want you to really understand that this is the stuff that you're supposed to be learning. This is the stuff you're going to use every single day of your life working as a web developer. So this is the thing you want to learn. This is the most important concept. There are more advanced stuff. There's prototypal inheritance, the stuff that in my experience I've used once, literally once. You can make your life harder by using it, and I'm the one to ditch, because I love JavaScript. I don't want to ditch it, but I can assure you that this is something that I use 20 times a day. So I can assure you that this is the most important thing that you can learn if you're learning JavaScript now. And you can probably use the same philosophy in Python as well. But basically, your entire website will go down to be either an object or a list of objects. You're going to have an object because let's say you have a menu, and the menu can be open or closed. So we could say, and I'm not going to use const, because if you type const and then you retype the variable, you're screwed when you're working with this. So I'll just type menu. Menu is going to be an object, and let's say open is set to false, right? And we can use classes, we can do a lot of stuff, but the point is the same. It's just an object with a property. So at that point, if you are using let's say you're using a no framework at this point, what you will do is you will have a render function that you will call on every frame, which you can do either with set interval, although it's not recommended. You will probably use request animation frame, and you will just call render, and render will just check if menu, okay, blah, blah, blah. And since you're going to have all of this for every variable, you probably will do something like render menu, right? You will have render menu, and render menu will be a function. If menu is just can only be true or false, you will probably just do an if else. There's no point in overcomplicating things, or probably you will just do if menu.open. You will probably just return, so that you don't have to do the else, because I don't like doing else's. I just like to put ifs. So you can do return, or you can do literally, you will basically, for example, do the stuff that I don't want to show you now, which will be document manipulation. But basically, you can look at the state of a website as a single object. And that's literally the philosophy of Redux, by the way. It's that the website is a bar, it's literally like a bar tab. So the Redux is the bartender. You can go anywhere on the website or any page, and the bartender keeps track of the tab. And so this is one way in which you can look at anything at this point. This in a more generic programming, again, the reason why I recommend CS50, you will call these structs. A struct is basically an object. Basically, it's something that has keys that contains properties. And by looking at the properties, you can model almost anything. We can keep going on this rabbit hole by talking about object-oriented programming. And I think CS50 does a good job at introducing the concepts. But again, we're working with actually functional languages and declarative approaches. So at this point, it's not necessary for us to talk about object-oriented programming, although it does help, and it definitely has a place in the programming industry. That said, again, you have an object. Imagine having more than one object. Are you going to put it? Are you going to have x equals to an object, and then you're going to have y equals to an object? No, you're never going to do this, because it needs to scale, because you can have one post, or let's say articles, one article or two articles or 10 articles. So what are you going to do? You're going to say articles is equal to a list, and your list, it will be a list of objects. And I like to use the keyword list over array, because again, we're talking functional programming. So you have a list, and in Python, they call it list as well. That's what it is. It's a list of articles. And then each article can have, for example, a title and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm going to have a second article. And then what I can do, thanks to my for each, my map, or my reduce, is I can do stuff on them. So if you're going to work with any declarative framework on the front end, you can use map to create an array, and the array will be automatically rendered for you by the framework. However, if you're working without any framework, you're probably going to use for each. And for each will allow you to do an operation for each of them. So you can do articles.forEach. And let me just zoom in a little bit, for each. And then you're going to receive an article, and I'm just going to write an arrow function. So allow me to have a little bit of a mystical and simplified syntax. If you're not familiar with it, it may be a little confusing, but I could just do something like, yeah, just close it by mistake. That's the beauty of being live. No, okay. Okay, my bad. So I could just do a backtick and say the title, and then put the article dot title. And at that point, I can just render my titles. And obviously we can start talking about document manipulation, DOM manipulation to render stuff. But once you know this, the point that I'm trying to make is that if you know this, then every single time you want to build for more than one, you just focus on doing it that works for one. So let's say you render one post with HTML and CSS, you make the box for one post, and then you just do for each. You put the functionality in a function, and then you call that function for each article. And that's how you go from being able to build something that is super niche and you feel like you have made no progress to making a ton of progress. So that's why these functions, the map, the for each, and the reduce, are literally superpowers. They're the most important thing that you can learn. And the other side of the equation is objects. So objects is another pattern, I guess. It's basically the alternative to using a switch that will actually empower you a lot. And the simplest example I can come up with now will be translations. So let's say you have a translation and you basically have multiple languages. You could just put a phrase here. So XYZ will be the phrase, or let's say I have a snake in my boot. And then you would have an object that could contain all the translations. So you would have, I have a snake in my boot, right? And then you would have an Italian version. And I'm also going to attempt the Spanish version for the Spanish viewer. Hola, hola chicos. And I'm going to say, ho un serpente nello stivale. And again, we're going to try the Spanish version, which I guess is going to be ES. Tengo un serpente en lo stivale. You know, you can send me the actual translation in the chat. But now, let's say you have this thing right here. Now, anytime you want to translate, you're going to do something like translation, square bracket, the name of the thing you want to translate, which you wouldn't codify it by the English version, but whatever. And then you would just get the translation that you need. And now, instead of having to do for each, for loop, find, blah, 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 I need to find, I'm desperate, you just do this, and you have a very simple way to visualize your data and use it. Now, if we're talking performance, honestly, I'm not going to make any argument related to performance. I'm not trying to make a point about performance, because premature optimization is the root of all evil. So if you try to optimize something that doesn't work, you're just going to optimize garbage. So don't try to solve for garbage, try to solve for something that works. So get something that works first and then optimize it later. So hopefully this helps you. En serpiente en las botas. El serpiente en las botas. Okay, gracias. Gracias, Marcelo. In the, you can, but hopefully you also get the point. So you understand lists, you understand objects. What's the next step? The next step is the DOM. This is where you're going to spend 99% of your time working with JavaScript, is the document object model. And you can get started in 10 seconds by typing document.query selector, and then you're going to have to use your CSS knowledge. And that's why don't waste your time doing CSS. You're going to have to learn CSS while doing JavaScript, because now you're forced to learn it. Because now how are you going to do all of your selectors? You're going to actually have to use them. So you're going to learn even more. So just learn the basics and then start getting to building real website, and you'll be forced to learn even more. And at this point, you have document.query selector. I can do body, for example, just to get something. And I can start playing around with it. I can do body equals to document.query selector body. And then I could do body.background equals to red and whatever. I can add properties. Technically speaking, you will do style.background, I'm guessing, and whatever. But basically, you start playing around with the document object model, you start adding elements, you start manipulating elements, you start changing text, you start creating elements. These are the next few steps. If you start doing that, you're basically good to go. All you're left with is what is called event-driven programming. So that's the last piece that you truly need, event-driven programming, which means that you're not only going to have your document object model, your reference to elements in the DOM, reference to elements in the browser, you're also going to use events to trigger functions. So anytime you click a button, you're going to call the handle button click function, and you're going to keep building your application on top of that. And once you do this, you're good to go. So at this point, the true thing that I have to tell you, because every other detail, you're just going to fill it up yourself. The thing that I truly have to give you will be a few exercises. And what would be the perfect exercises for you to learn JavaScript and to build a little bit of a website will be to build a menu. You want to have a menu where you click and it opens. You want to build a data visualization, or let's call it post visualization, because that's what you truly want to do. You want to do post/product visualization, like a list. Just do a simple e-commerce or a simple list. Very important. It's one of the most used things. And then you want to do an API project. Let's go back to what I said about the portfolio. What's your portfolio? Your portfolio is going to be CRUD, e-commerce, API. So CRUD means that at this point, you need to also add Ajax or fetch, let's call it, whichever you're going to do fetch, but you're going to add Ajax because it sounds cooler. And you're going to talk to a backend. At this point, we haven't spoke about backend, so we're going to start talking about it in a second. But at the end of the day, you're going to use your knowledge to do this. You're going to interact with the DOM, which is basically this application is a perfect example of interacting with the DOM. You're going to figure out this principle of lists and objects. And then you're going to learn your superpowers. You map for each and reduce. And there's more, but there's no reason to get into those for now. So you're going to do that. And then you're going to learn about event-driven programming, which means handling click, handling blur, handling all that stuff. And then you're going to do your fetch. Once you do this, you basically built your interactive website. So if I have to give you more interesting projects that you may want to look at, these are 100% electives. These are quote unquote a waste of time if you want to make money faster. But something that I did because I thought it was cool was drag and drop beard on top of photos. So that's something that I built many years ago. At this point, it was called Beard Yourself. You will take a picture of yourself and then you will move a piece of beard, or you will be able to paint. And then you can play around with the canvas to do games or 2D manipulation. Great project will be paint. Just do a paint where you have color picker and then you do it. If you do a paint, are you telling me you're not going to get a job? You're going to get a job immediately. Like, you got to be smart enough to do paint. And it's also fun. And it probably takes an hour, to be honest, if you especially if you do it with P5.js. So I guess that brings us to libraries on JavaScript. I'm just going to talk very briefly about libraries. The reality is you will learn whatever the market asks you to learn. That's the real answer. However, you're going to incur in a few ideologies as you go, and you're going to incur into vanilla. There's people that will tell you write vanilla because it's optimal. And my answer to that is, if you're learning today, write vanilla. If you're learning today, I learned when you needed jQuery. So my brain works in a different way. So we basically have different brains. But if you're learning today, you can go and learn vanilla. Alternatively, and I like that it's on the other side, you can do P5.js. Processing is most likely the simplest way to get stuff done in the front end. 100% beautiful framework. I love the way it works. Will highly recommend you looking at it. If you're an advanced developer, you're going to love it even more because it makes all those tedious setup stuff a breeze. So I highly recommend you looking into it. 100% elective though. You don't have to use P5.js. But if you're interested in doing some quirky, small self-contained project, look into it. And then you have the Colossus, which will be jQuery. And the question is, will you have to learn jQuery in 2020? The answer is only if you're paid for it. That's the real answer. The only answer that is acceptable enough is you're going to have to learn jQuery if you have to consult for people that use jQuery, or consult for people that use WordPress, or if they ask you to do it. But the reality of it in 2020 is that if you bootstrap a project, you're just going to use vanilla. You're not going to use jQuery, because at this point we have fetch. At this point we have the document.query selector. We also have ECMAScript 6. The only thing that is more annoying in vanilla is creating elements. That's the only thing that is more annoying in vanilla. And I think there's also a solution for dynamic binding at this point. So basically it's all solved in vanilla, where a few years ago you would have to do a bunch of jQuery magic in order to get everything to run. So I can go deeper on this, but off the top of my head, I don't have the pros and cons of vanilla versus jQuery ready. So if you have any interest in that, put it in the chat or in the comments, because it will take me a couple hours to research the topic if you want me to make a video on it. But the short answer is vanilla all the way in 2020, jQuery if they pay you for it. I guess this opens up a great question of whether you should be getting paid to learn new technologies. Okay, should you get paid to learn on the job? This is a very tough and ethical question. And the only simple answer I can give you is that your employer should tell you that. As long as your employer understands that you know how to do it, but you never did it, which is the proper way of phrasing yourself. So instead, whenever somebody asks you, have you ever done this? Which is the worst question you can ever get. Let's say I'm going to hire you. We're literally hiring at Polymarket, by the way. So if you're a web-free developer, you can send us an email at poly.market. Send me an email at at alex@poly.market. Send me an email here if you are a web-free developer. And the question that I'll ask you will be, have you ever done GSN, which is gas server network? Basically, have you ever done technology X? The worst answer you can give me is no, and just shut up. If you tell me no and then you stay quiet, you basically are disqualifying yourself. You're telling me I'm not worth it, and it's like weird. Instead, what you can tell me is, okay, I've read about it. This is how I will go about doing it, and these are the steps that I will take. And then, but I haven't done it. That's how you actually do it properly. And if you do that, most people, whenever there's enough value, enough trust, will be okay with you learning on the job, especially when it's so niche. So in the case of literally this job, Polymarket, I think we found somebody that already does it, but we're kind of open to people that haven't done it because it's that niche. I believe that people that have done GSN and have worked on the Polymarket product, which are conditional token framework based on Ethereum, there's probably 5 people in the entire world that have done both. So I understand that it's completely fine for you to learn on the job. And most people will be fine with that as well, as long as you're open to it and as long as you don't blow yourself out. So never just do a single word answer of saying no. Instead, you can say, okay, this is the docs. Okay, these are the steps. I can look into it, and this is how I will go about doing it, but I haven't done it. And that way you're making me understand what the process is. You're actually giving me more certainty in showing that you can adapt, because adaptability is a very important skill. And just look at it this way: whenever you're applying to a job, the person that hires you just want to swipe their credit card and doesn't want to think about it. I just want to swipe my credit card, spend my money, just do it. Just take my money, just do it. Just like Fry, shut up and take my money, just do it. Okay. You have to be so good that I can trust you with giving me the money and you're going to give me the thing done. And I'm not going to have any headache. If you start putting in headaches, you make it more complicated. So just make it easy for me to say yes. That's basically the reality of it. So I think that covers the JavaScript side. I'm going to briefly look at the questions. Can I just leave a question here from Mr. Pogi? What's your opinion on Jamstack for freelancing? Amazing. I teach Jamstack. I've also applied to talk at the Jamstack conference, and my talk is going to be build your startup prototype in 7 days. Hopefully I get picked by them, and I'm going to do a presentation on that. Personally speaking, the only issue I find with Gatsby is that you're niching yourself down to static website, although you can have the dynamic side. So if I were to tell you about a cookie cutter, one single solution, I would recommend Next.js. However, to get started with rapid prototyping and building an MVP, I highly recommend Create React App, because you can always build your own server-side rendering solution manually. Something we did here on Polymarket, and maybe I'll make a separate video on the topic, is that there is no server-side rendering for any page except the single market page. So if you send us a single market page, we send you customized headers, customized header data, so that Twitter can show a different card. And you can do that in a couple hours if I show you the process. It took me 40 hours to learn it, and then it takes only 2 hours once you learn it. So it's like, I can make you a Jedi master in only 2 hours. And that way you don't even need to learn extra technologies. But you can look at the trade-offs. Again, instead of me telling you what to do, you look at the trade-offs and you look at what the company needs. And that's really the real core skill of freelancing. Next up, we got Michelangelo Alessi. He says, hi, Alex, I have a question. Do you see combination of WordPress, REST API, and React as a front end as a good and stable solution for a website? Okay, and e-commerce. I love the question, and my answer is yes. My experience with working with the WordPress API as of a couple of years ago was very frustrating. I had a lot of issues in setting up the WordPress API, and that's why I moved to using Strapi. That's basically why I use Strapi. And if you look at my channel, I'm like the world expert in teaching Strapi, I guess, or I guess I'm the only one that teaches it, but yeah, the world expert, number one, 1 out of 1. But basically, Strapi is basically what you're looking for. It provides a very simple to bootstrap API with CRUD routes. It provides a very strong security model. It also provides authentication. I personally teach, and I have a course called the Complete Strapi course. At this point, the ecosystem is strong enough that there's going to be plugins. Literally, I've released my first plugin called Strapi plugin-entrepreneur Stripe, and you can download this package and you can have Stripe work on your Strapi application. It looks like it already has 43 downloads, so basically people are already using it, and you can process your payment with this, and it's very straightforward. And then you can build your front end however you want. So this is something that you want to look. This is an ecosystem that is going to get very strong, and it's constantly growing. It's in its infancy now. To me, this is the new WordPress, but maybe WordPress is going to surprise us. And I am a diehard WordPress fan. So if WordPress becomes cooler, I'll be the first to jump boat. But at this time, due to the fact that Strapi is full JavaScript, due to the fact that it's easier for me to bootstrap APIs, I actually recommend you check Strapi. I happen to also teach it, but there's a free intro on my channel. Alternatively, you can take the complete Strapi course for like $15, and it's 26 hours of content. And I'm gonna push the plugin development section in a week from now. So in a week from now, you're basically gonna have the best course you can ever get with a evolving ecosystem, and you may even have an opportunity to build your own paid plugins if you're interested in getting started with that. So that's that, which leads us to the big question on the back end, because I haven't touched Python at all. All I said about Python is that if you're going to use Python, from my experience, it's because you already were forced to. Like that's how it actually happens. You learn Python because they recommend it to you at school. They recommend it to you because there's a book for making Python games. There's Pygame. There's books to get started with Python super fast. And so Python is a very, very solid solution. The problem you're going to face is that you will still have to learn JavaScript. So there's no way to go about that. You will have to learn JavaScript if you want to do web development. But then you can make a decision. When you get to the backend, your next decision will be, do you want to learn Python? Maybe you already know, or do you want to learn JavaScript? Those are the main questions. Obviously, I'm ignoring the fact that there's Ruby on Rails, there's Rust, there's Go. You can learn a lot more. I'm ignoring a lot of things, but I'm trying to keep it simple because this is 80% of you. This is the only conversation you should have. You should ignore everything else, especially if you're getting started. Obviously, you can go on Rust. From what I understand, Rust is the language that most people love, although fair, it's used by 5% of the community. But let's say, I guess, look at jobs and salaries for it. Although, to be fair, if we're gonna stroke our ego with the salaries, you all should be self-driving car machine learning engineers. That's the only job, because it's 300 grand a year to 500 grand a year. That's the job you want to take if you're doing it for the money, and that's it. You want to do what's it called, Audacity Nano Degree self-driving cars. That's the money decision. You want to make a decision based purely on money. That's the job you want to take. This is definitely not it, though. And that's the cheaper alternative. But I'm pretty sure that the statistics says that you can make 300 grand out of this job. Basically, that's the average salary for a self-driving car engineer. So if you're looking for that freelance task, I'm available for freelance task. You can send me an email at alex at entrepreneur.xyz, or you can just go on Code Mentor or do Code Mentor hourly sessions, or you can just come on Code Mentor and I can help you by the hour. And typically, for most people, help by the hour is the best solution because you're probably already super smart. So all you need is like an hour of work with me and you're going to be on your way, instead of having to pay me, thousands of dollars to get to do the job that you can do, that you just don't know that extra piece. So most of the time it's best, and it's most win-win for me to teach rather than to code. But I'm very happy to take your offer if you want to send it there. And staying in theme with this, if you're gonna just ask me for a price, I'm gonna be very cutthroat because I don't know you. So I'm just gonna be very honest. But I'm a great person to work with. Although you should take it from people that have worked with me, not from me. You shouldn't take. But again, I have a lot of good reviews, and you'll see that I'm a very high communication skills. That said, let's really have this conversation on the back end. And the big conversation on the back end, and I guess I'll plug myself for the last time here, would be maybe you can skip it all and just use Strapi or use Firebase, which is the elephant in the room, right? Firebase versus Strapi, one of my most popular videos. Who's it gonna be, Strapi versus Firebase? And the answer is whichever you prefer. That's the real answer. I prefer Strapi because it's JavaScript, it's open source, it's simple to understand. I didn't have to learn a single line of code because I just do a fetch request to an API that is a REST compliant API. Firebase is learning a new SDK, so I didn't want to learn a new SDK, and that's why I chose Strapi. I have nothing against Firebase. I've worked with clients from all over the world that use Firebase, and I've helped them with debugging tons of issues, especially related to memory management and event-driven programming when dealing with real-time data in Firebase, memory leaks, that kind of stuff. I can do it. I've done it. I respect that, and I have nothing against it. I just happen to prefer Strapi. The reason why I mentioned that in the backend is that if you want to be a full stack developer or a front end developer, you don't have to spend the next 60 hours or even 500 hours learning all of this backend tech. You could just settle, quote unquote, let's go back to the portfolio items. You have the CRUD product, create, read, update, delete. You have the e-commerce product and the API related product. You can just spin up a front end and then use Strapi or Firebase as a backend, or use an existing API. There's a Ether gas price API if you want to do an Ether thingy. There's probably coin market cap API if you want to do crypto related stuff. These are two that comes off the top of my head. For all of you lovers of the weather, you can do a weather API widget, because that's like it's like a character trait. People that love the weather, so you can show that as a characteristic. Although to be fair, I remember one of my dearest mentee, people that I've mentored, turning their weather API into something that looks awesome, like super awesome, and actually landing a job out of it. And that's why whenever I say that you need free projects, I say that you need free projects, but you gotta go on Dribble or Fiverr or Pay or whatever, and you gotta get good designs. So you should be going here and you should talk to Permadi Satra Dewanto and sending them a message. I love your e-commerce design. Is there any chance I can use it to do a quick portfolio so that I can get a job? I will feature you, or I will pay you $25, $50. Can I have a couple of these designs so that I can use them? And that way, if you imagine building an app that looks like this, how are you not going to get hired? Imagine building something that looks like this. It's not that complicated. It's really not. It's just that extra step. And yet again, look at my website, which is garbage, and I'm the first to admit it. And why is that? It's because once you go over the hurdle, it doesn't matter anymore. But if you have nothing, if you have no YouTube channel, no course, you're not the expert on the thing, you're just learning, then ensure that whatever you have looks as professional as you can. So spending that extra time polishing is the way to go. Okay, so now let's keep going. At this point, you're gonna have to make a decision. Do I learn Node.js or do I go with Python? And Python means either Django, which is I guess a more object-oriented solution, or Flask. These are the two big questions. I wouldn't call myself an expert on either. I have consulted 20, 30 clients on it in the last year. So I did make productive efforts on it. But I personally would have you make the call. You're just going to look at one of them. And you're going to make a decision. And you're just going to have to figure that out. The point that you're going to have to make versus the reason why I prefer Node.js, to be honest, is this. Look, okay, now let's say you get started with Node.js. What is any sane person going to do? Is just going to make a video, highly educated video. What am I going to do? I'm just going to say, okay, Express Quick Start, which is literally what one of my previous course looked like. I'm like, go in the Quick Start, click on Hello World, copy Hello World. And I happened to work on something a couple hours ago. So I'll just cd server 2 and npm run dev. And basically, let me open up npm run dev, server 2. And that's really all you need. What does it take? Does it take any skill? No, you just go, you copy the code that you got from Express website, and now you have an application running on localhost 3000. And it says hello world. And then you take it from there. Next up, you build routes. You just do app.get /post, blah, blah, blah. And you keep building. You could have a local variable here called post, or I guess, yeah, const post equals square bracket is fine. It's a singleton. And then you can interact through post via the API, and you can manipulate it. And you could just do something like post.push rec.body.post. And I think we need to add the body parser here, which at this point you don't even need to use a reference. But basically, you just start with this and you're good to go. My experience with the Django Quick Start was more painful. But again, if you know Python, you're not going to have that bad of a time. And it also is a more complete, less modular framework where you have templates and stuff. So it's pretty good. From my experience, most people that instead build, let's call them microservices or API-oriented backends, they typically use Flask, and you only build APIs with Node.js. Although technically speaking, you can use Pug or EJS to render stuff. So there are alternatives, but what's really the point that I want to make? What are the true skills that you're going to learn? So because you have these options, but what are the actual skills? Let's look at the skills. One skill is going to be API. API means REST API, which also means JSON API. What are the conventions there? You're going to have your get, your post, your put, your delete. Some people also want a patch. I live in a world where you can just use put to edit, but some people like to patch things. That's okay. And at the end of the day, you can learn those in a few hours, and you can get to building JSON APIs in hours, both with Django, Flask, or with Node.js. If you can't build APIs, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you're going to be forced to use either the monolith WordPress, or you're going to be forced to use Strapi or Firebase. So in my experience, it's best to learn this part right here. But this stuff just gets more complicated. So once we have this, the next step is to add a database. So you're just going to do your CRUD, because once you have database, you can do CRUD, which means create, read, update, and delete. And once you do that, the step after is authentication. So how are you going to handle authentication? There's a million of ways. The topic gets super broad and it's very hard to discuss fully. The main point is that there's basically two ways to do authentication. There's session and there's JWT. You need to be aware of both. There's going to be JWT, which is a fancy tool that allows to say, I am me. It's basically proof that I am me. And session, which instead allows you again to say that they are them, and it's a more traditional approach. Session on a monolith on WordPress is the only option that you ever add, and if you use Django, I think you get sessions automatically, because if your backend is serving your front end, so if you have a monolith, you're going to have an easy time setting up sessions, while you're going to have a little bit of a harder time setting that up if you have a separated server from a client. And JWT tokens tried to accommodate for this issue, although I think it gets super messy. It's the one thing where I truly believe that the majority of websites in the world are unsafe whenever they use JWTs. So I'm not going to go into a discussion on this. My 2 cents are, if you need to do authentication, use magic.link, which I'm going to ask to sponsor this video, I guess. So if you see this video, sponsor me, magic.link. Basically, use magic.link or use Auth0. These 2 are professional solutions that are also insured, so that if they lose your data, they're going to pay you back at least. So that way you can sleep at night. You don't have to be scared. Although technically speaking, you can also incur in weaker trade-offs, but I'm going to skip this part. So authentication is a huge deal. It's one of the most complex parts of building APIs and building microservices and building backends. And there's people that specialize in the topic. And in my experience, there's very few people that are actually competent. And I wouldn't consider myself an expert at all. So and probably there's like 2 or 3 people that have written articles on the topic, and then they actually know what they're doing. So those are the few people that I will refer you to. If I find some links, I'll add them in the description later. But you definitely want to be aware of that. And if you're going to deal with authentication, you need to deal with, is it OSWAP or OWASP? OWASP. With the OWASP security, basically the security advisory. So I'm just going to put a link here. And basically you want to, is it the correct one? XSS, let me see. Yeah, I think it's it. But basically you want to read about security threats such as cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service, that kind of stuff. You want to be aware of it. You want to be aware also of the fact that if you're building a backend and a front end, your front end architecture may actually end up DDoSing your backend because you may be doing too many requests. So you want to just grow with experience. Again, looking back at the projects, you want to build a CRUD, which is basically forcing you to do the create, read, update, delete. And if you want to do it even further, you could add a little bit of authentication. Then you want to do an e-commerce, which is basically a CRUD with payment handling. And you can just use Stripe. From my experience, it's such an easy to use API. And every single API that came after that, the process payments, is just a copy of this. So if you learn Stripe, you can learn any other payment API, unless there's like a niche, super niche variation on it. But basically, they're all the same at this point because they've been standardized by Stripe. And at that point, you should have a fairly solid grasp and a fairly solid understanding of what you're gonna do. So at this point, after this live, could mentor pages down. I'll get there in a second, but after this, what I truly want you to do, and in a week from now, there's going to be a new video that actually goes into detail on the portfolio. But what I want you to do is I want you to think of the free portfolio items that you're going to have. I want you to think of how you're going to show them. I want you to think of how they're going to look. And most importantly, I want you to commit to actually doing them. At this point, you know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have these free items, a CRUD project, an e-commerce, and an API. And then you want to go and you want to start talking to potential clients. You're going to pick up the rest of the skills as you go. You're just going to learn as much as you need instead of learning everything that you're told to learn. Of course, there are curriculums, and the other advice I could give you would be to look at your ideal job and then look at the person that already has it and then figure out what they did and just do that. That's as simple as it gets. It's called modeling, but it doesn't have to be a term. It's just called common sense. So just keep going, get started, make sure that you keep learning along the way. So if you go on the Code Mentor, you should be able to find me here, codementor.io at Alessandro Valeran. Maybe because I changed the name now. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to change the URL, but basically it's Alex Entrepreneur, so that in 10 years from now, my name will be wiped off the internet, so that I can have a pseudonym rather than a name. But basically, if you're interested in working with me, that's the link. Or I'll fix the URL in a minute or so. Thank you for the recommendations. Thank you for watching this video. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna drink my coffee and I'll spend the next 5 minutes answering questions if you have any. Otherwise, I appreciate your viewership and thank you very much for watching. So if you have any question, I'll hang out for a minute or two and I'll answer them. My coffee was hot when I started, by the way, so props to me. Okay, so I guess I'm gonna call it a day. As for newer things that are upcoming for for this channel, we're basically gonna have the Strapi plugin section, which you can already get a preview of in the code in GitHub. There's already a bunch of repos with new code in on the thingy. I'm having my editor cut. We just basically need to have him adjust the volumes for the section. And then honestly, this is like the primest thing that I did in the course. I think the course started as a decent course. Like it was the best course available because the competition is non-existent. But now after adding the e-commerce product and then adding the quick start so that you get started immediately building something, now this is a new addition for advanced developers. So I think only 10% of the people that actually took the course should even attempt to learn this stuff. However, this stuff is the gold mine. There's a huge opportunity here because you can take your knowledge, you can build a bunch of plugins, and you can sell them to people that actually need them. And as Strapi becomes more popular, your plugins are going to become more popular as well. So I look at that as a huge opportunity. I also put the Stripe plugin as an open source, gift to the community. I think it's fine. I'm definitely planning on building a little bit more. This is, by the way, this was Traversy Media covering Strapi. That's how it got popular, and now it's here. But it's still twice as many downloads as last year, so it's still moving at a pace that is very respectable. And if you look at Google Trends, it's growing as fast as Gatsby. So Gatsby and Strapi are bound to grow together, perhaps in a niche. That's how I see them, as a niche that is going to grow up. And the other side is just going to be more dynamic architectures, more dynamic solutions. So I see Marcelo, Alex, I'm trying Next.js and Strapi, but I know how to handle tokens. Yeah, that's literally the one thing that I will hate to cover, because I mean, I'm thinking of making a Next.js course, but the thing that truly scares me the most is dealing with Strapi authentication with Next.js. So the only thing that I can show you right now is to go in Next.js examples, and there's an example with Passport. I'm bad. But basically, this may be the reason why I end up not even making the course. Or maybe I'll make the course and I'll never touch authentication. I'm thinking of doing only Magic as the authentication. And I'm thinking of building a plugin for Magic and Strapi. I'll reach out to the Magic team. I want to see if they want to sponsor it, because I think this is the way to handle authentication. You just, like, I'll show you how you log in here. You just put your email and then they send you a link. And that's how you're supposed to log in stuff. You're not supposed to build your own server with authentication, where it's no longer 1990s. So this is something that is more modern. And if you look, instead of the Next.js example, which you can find by searching for Next.js examples with Passport, you should see a lib that basically shows you how to encrypt stuff. And then you can see the create user and the find user. You're going to create user and find user. So technically speaking, you could just put a fetch request here to Strapi. Like literally just put a fetch request to Strapi here, and you just fetch a user by username and password. If they logged in, you return it. Otherwise, you don't. And that's basically it. So this is how you will be able to reuse this stuff, and you don't even have to know how it actually works. And but maybe I'll do, if I end up doing the Next.js course, what I'll do with this video specifically will be going through this code, and I'll just give you a quick preview. But basically, there's Iron. Iron is just a way to hash the session so that the data in the session is viewable on the server side of Next.js, but it's not viewable on the client side. And that's just a way to keep it even safer. So this will be a way for you to set it up. You literally don't even have to know how it actually works. Just get that, just override this to function here on user in the lib of with Passport, and you're good to go. Although again, I would not recommend using Strapi for authentication at this point. So I guess I'll call it a day. Please put a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more. Use the comments to let me know which other topics to cover, or just send me props to having the courage of drinking only one coffee during a live stream. That way, the algorithm can pick me up and I can be viewed a little bit more. Again, I appreciate your viewership and I wish you an amazing day, and I'll talk to you soon.